There are a few traditional practices during Lent. What are the 3 traditional Catholic practices during Lent, and where do they come from? Have we heard them before? The 3 Lenten practices are prayer, fasting, and almsgiving. Prayer, fasting, and almsgiving are the 3 traditional Lenten practices for us as Catholics. First of all, where do those come from? Did someone make those up one day, or do they come from the Bible? They come from the Gospel of Matthew. In the Gospel of Matthew, Jesus talks about those 3 practices. We'll hear those words on Ash Wednesday. He talks about praying, and he talks about fasting, and he talks about almsgiving. And what does Jesus say when it comes to those things? Praying and fasting and almsgiving. When we do those things, should we do it in a big public way so that everyone can see us and they can praise us and think how good we are? What does Jesus tell us on Wednesday? When you do those things, do them in secret, so that it's between God and you. Right? When you pray, don't go stand out in the street and pray so that you draw the attention of everyone and they say, oh, look at him or her, they're so holy. No. That's not how you pray. Interesting. Praying, fasting, and almsgiving. Should we unpack those 3 traditional Lenten practices? First of all, prayer. What does it mean? It means that these are 40 days for us to focus a little more on prayer. What do you think of that challenge this year during Lent? Of us finding just a little more time each day for prayer. Maybe a minute more, or 2, or 5 minutes more for us to find time for prayer during the day. By prayer, what do we mean? Sitting down and saying in Our Father or a Hail Mary? There are lots of ways to pray, right? There are lots of ways to pray. To communicate with God and or to enjoy God's presence or God's creation, right? Many times, many of the things that we do in the course of a day can be a prayer, right? So prayer is one Lenten practice, one traditional Lenten practice from the Gospel of Matthew. What about this tradition of fasting? First of all, what does it mean to fast? To fast is to go without food. So breakfast, in the morning, breakfast is a time for us to break our what? Our fast. Unless you sleepwalk and you get up at night and you're eating while you're sleeping, most of us when we sleep, we're fasting. We're not eating. So we're fasting all night long while we sleep, and then when we wake up, we break our fast with a meal that we call breakfast. Right? So to fast is to go without food. The question is, why would people go without food? Have we thought of this before? What's so good about going without food? Nothing, right? Nothing's in this. Why would we do that? Why would you go without food? First of all, we'll come back to the word that Mario said, sacrifice, in a moment. But let's talk about in the ancient mind, they used to divide things into dichotomies, into opposites. So that there was good and there's bad. There's right and there's wrong, right? There's black and there's white. For the ancient mind, there were various dichotomies, right? And one of the dichotomies that they created in the ancient world was body and spirit, right? Focusing on this world, the material, and the other world, right? So the question is, which world should we be focused more on? Should we be more focused on this world or on the world that is to come? What do you think? Both, says Mario. But in the ancient mind, they're focused more on the spiritual rather than on the material. So there was this denial of the material for the ancients, which meant that for them, they believed that there was something good in denying our bodies of something that they need. In many places, they took this practice to an extreme. They practiced things like self-flagellation. What is that? Mistreating your body, right? So this idea of fasting was for us to grow in holiness. The word that Mario used was, it was a sacrifice What does the word sacrifice mean? It comes from a Latin word sacrificere, to make holy. Our sacrifices ideally should do what? They should make us holy. Why do we do sacrifices? Why do you make a sacrifice? Because you believe it will make you more holy. That's what sacrifices are all about. So by denying ourselves something that we like, by sacrificing that nice, if I'm in the habit of buying a Starbucks every day, I'm going to use that example. I don't drink coffee, but say I buy a Starbucks and I just can't live without a Starbucks. For me, it would be a sacrifice to give that up. Ooh, do you see where we're going with this whole Lenten idea of fasting? How many of us grew up with ideas that we had to give something up during Lent? Did we all grow up with those ideas?
Yeah.
How interesting that we denied ourselves something we like, whether that was candy, or soda, or caffeine, or cigarettes, or you name it. Whatever it was that we gave up during Lent. Why? We did that as a sacrifice to grow in holiness. Now the church has changed on this since the 1960s. So for those of us who grew up before or during the 1960s, that was one church. After the Vatican Council, the church started to say, wait a minute, is it really better to give something up like candy or soda? Or better to make other sacrifices that maybe push us outside of our comfort zone? Like that person you don't like, to go up to that person and to say something nice to that person. Ma, you look beautiful today. Which is the bigger sacrifice? I will give up candy for all of Lent before I say something nice to that person, right? Which is the bigger sacrifice? And so beginning in the 1960s, the church started asking these questions. If we're really going to make a sacrifice, think to yourself, what is the biggest sacrifice you could make? And it doesn't have to be that big, follow me? Sometimes it's simply looking around at those people that we interact with every day, our family members, our friends, our co-workers, the people to whom we serve and minister during the course of a day, and figure out, instead of giving up something like chocolate or candy or soda, what's something that we could do instead as a sacrifice for those people? How's that for a Lenten challenge? So that's prayer and fasting, and this idea of almsgiving. Almsgiving, what are alms? How do you spell alms? Alms are spelled A-L-M-S, alms. What are alms? Have we heard that word before? Alms are money for the poor. To give alms meant to give to those in need. So for us, Lent, if Lent's a time of prayer and fasting and almsgiving, it's a call for us to be a little more generous with those gifts that God has given us, right? All that food in our pantry, what did the ancients, St. Basil, what did he say? Who does that food in your pantry belong to? St. Basil said that food belongs to the poor. He said that clothes in your closet, who does it belong to? I see some of you elbowing the person beside you. The clothes in your closet, who does it belong to? St. Basil said it belongs to the poor. Yikes. That pair of shoes, he said, that's rotting in your closet. He said you are robbing the poor by not sharing with them. Ooh. So Lent is a time for us to look into the mirror at ourselves and to ask ourselves, how am I generously sharing with those in need? How am I sharing of my resources? How am I sharing of the food in my pantry? Of the clothes in my closet? Of the shoes in my closet? How am I sharing with those who could be using those if I'm not? One thing if I'm using them, it's another thing if, well, I haven't used it in a few years and there's someone who could be using that. As Catholics, we also have this other Lenten practice of abstaining during meat. Have we heard, when as Catholics do we fast and when do we abstain from meat? How's that for a question? They're two different things. Fasting and abstinence are two different things. Fasting, We fast on Ash Wednesday and Good Friday. What has the church always said about fasting? Fasting means that you eat one meal like you usually do, and the other 2 meals aren't as big as that meal. It's going with a little less on Ash Wednesday and Good Friday. That's fasting for us on Ash Wednesday and Good Friday, the church has said. But what is abstaining from meat? When do we abstain from meat?
Friday.
As Catholics, we abstain from meat on the Fridays of Lent and also on Ash Wednesday.
Does it have to be?
So on Ash Wednesday and on the Fridays of Lent, we abstain from meat, which means that for all the catfish parlors in town, it's they can't wait for Lent to come around.
Father.
Where did that come from, the whole history of abstaining from meat during Lent? From the Italian fish markets. Interesting. It would be like the catfish market, or the catfish parlor here in Austin, saying to the bishop, remember that gift that I gave you last year, Bishop? Wouldn't it be nice if we were to help teach people in the Catholic Church about the value of abstaining from meat, from something we enjoy? And maybe people could eat catfish instead, right? And so that idea sprung up in the medieval church as a way for us to be able to abstain from meat during Lent.
When did it start that it had to be on Friday, though?
When did it start that it has to be on Friday?
Could it be any other day?
Could it be any other day? Actually, that's a good question. So, why fast on Friday as opposed to Thursday or Monday? Why does it have to be the Fridays of Lent? What's the symbolism of Friday? Historically, what happened on Friday? Friday was the day that Jesus died. What's the day that we celebrate? Good Friday. And so Friday is a traditional day of fasting in remembrance of Jesus' death. Interesting. Jesus died on a Friday, rose on a Sunday. Why are we here on a Sunday? Oh, Jesus rose on a Sunday. Why do we fast on Fridays? Oh, Jesus died on a Friday. Interesting. So the tradition of fasting sprung up as a way for us to remember Jesus' death. Jesus died on a cross for you. Can you not just make a little sacrifice yourself? So that's a brief introduction to the season of Lent, which we begin this week on February the 18th. This Wednesday, February the 18th, we celebrate Ash Wednesday. That begins this season of 40 days of fasting and prayer and almsgiving, this season of Lent.